to our next session of our Neurodiversity Digital Focus Day. We're very pleased to welcome Dr. Deborah Leveroy of Dyslexia Box, where she is the Neurodiversity and Inclusion Lead. Deborah gained her PhD from the University of Kent in inclusion, drama and specific learning difficulties. Her practice-based work has been published in peer-reviewed journals and she's been cited in 9 academic journals. An inclusive learning specialist, it's Deborah's job to help organisations improve the performance of their employees through training, coaching and mentoring. For more than 15 years, Deborah has worked across diverse industries and indeed has assisted employees with different learning needs. But currently she's focusing on dyslexia with Dyslexia Box, an award-winning organisation which helps employers make reasonable adjustments for their employees and offers assistive technology services. A warm welcome to you today, Deborah. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me.
Well, I think we'll make a start with your presentation. I know you've got some slides to show us, and then we may have some questions at the end.
Absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth. So I will just bring up my slides. I hope you can see them okay. So the title of my talk is Supporting Dyslexia in the Workplace. We're going to focus on the why. So why should we support dyslexia in the workplace? We're going to look at end-to-end disability support. So what does that look like? Why is it important? And also the benefits of this kind of service. So first of all, we're going to focus on the why. So as the employer, why should you support an employee with dyslexia? Now, there's many reasons. The first I'm going to start with is we're going to look at the legal side. So your legal duty as an employer in the UK. So dyslexia is protected under the Equality Act 2010. Under the Act, a disability is classed as a physical or mental impairment, which has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on the employee's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. Now, the British Dyslexia Association suggests that dyslexia is a lifelong condition and has a significant impact on a person's day-to-day life. It meets the criteria of a disability and therefore is covered under the Equality Act 2010. Now, what does this mean? So this means that employers have a duty to make workplace adjustments or accommodations, as they're called in America, which is a change to remove or reduce the effect of an employee's disability so they can do their job, a job applicant's disability when applying for a job. Now, this reasonable adjustment could be to the workplace, to the way things are done, so that could be work processes and workflows. It could be to get someone to help the employee or job applicant to do their job. Now, crucially, but right at the end of my list, is the word anticipatory. So that means that these adjustments, as the employer, you need to anticipate that you will need to make these adjustments. So it's no longer good enough to wait for the employee to come to you and say that they have a problem and they need support. As the employer, you need to be looking at your workplace and making it as inclusive as possible before you get to the point of somebody coming to you and seeking support. So the next slide, we're still talking about the why. So why do we need to support dyslexia in the workplace? So very briefly, I'm going to talk about the business case. So from a business perspective, yes, we have the legal perspective. There's an imperative, but more importantly than that, the British Dyslexia Association estimates that anything up to 10% of the population are dyslexic or have dyslexic characteristics. 4.1 million people with a disability are employed in the UK. So that means that whether you've got only 10 employees or you've got 100,000, you are going to have employees with dyslexia or other neurodiverse profiles. And similarly, you're very, very likely to have customers or clients who are also neurodiverse or have dyslexia. So making sure that your kind of, if you like, neurodiverse policy or dyslexia policy filters through to your customer service is going to also have a positive benefit to your clients. So why else should you support people with dyslexia? So people with dyslexia and other neurodiverse profiles are known to have strengths. So it's not just about what we can't do. So those strengths might be problem solving, strategic thinking, creativity, people skills, negotiating skills. So those are skills that are valuable to you as a business owner, to you as an employer. having said that, it's really important that when you put somebody obviously in place in those roles, that you're still giving them support. So lastly, why should we support people with dyslexia in the workplace? So the third, I guess, argument, if you like, is around the diversity and inclusion agenda. So it's looking at neurodiversity in the broader context of diversity and inclusion. So somebody who has dyslexia or Asperger's, you know, they're not just that one identity. There are other identities, you know, within that person, whether that's their gender or their ethnicity, but it's all part of that that broader perspective. And also, it's really important in terms of overcoming assumptions and barriers. So often, particularly with dyslexia, we might think we know what dyslexia means, and that might mean that when we encounter an employee with dyslexia, that we treat them in a certain way, and that might not be correct. I'll give you an example of an employee who said that her employer said to her, well, you can't really be dyslexic because you've got an English degree. So within that example, there's another number of assumptions about what dyslexia is, and you know, what it isn't, and also the idea that that person's somehow not being honest. So that is just a very brief overview of why we should support dyslexia in the workplace. So we're going to move now to talk about end-to-end disability support. So often I've put kind of lots of random words on the screen here. You'll see workplace adjustments, access to work, coaching and training, Equality Act, workplace adjustments, assistive technology, ergonomics. So there are a lot of kind of words, kind of, if you like, bandied around disability support. But what, aside from what do these mean, how do we approach them? So what's the kind of order or process? So often this person on the screen, let's say it's the line manager or the HR manager, is dealing with an employee with dyslexia. Where do you start? There are lots of different sort of elements at play, people at play, facilities management, access to work. You know, where do we go? So what we want is, rather than that person looking quite confused with lots of question marks, is we will want something that looks more like this. So this idea of an end-to-end support model. So we're looking at access to work guidance. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're looking at workplace assessments, putting in place workplace adjustments, any recommendations that come in, such as assistive technology, coaching and training, any ergonomic needs, and also looking at technical support and strategy coaching as well. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this model of end-to-end disability support and what it looks like, and you know, what the benefits are. So I guess before we get to any kind of external provider, whether that's access to work or a private company, we're really looking at the workplace culture to begin with, which we touched on slightly earlier. So encouraging disclosure, so whether that's improving sort of the onboarding experience for new employees in terms of talking about neurodiversity or dyslexia openly, asking open questions so they feel that they can disclose, or having members of the senior leadership team perhaps talk about their experiences of being dyslexic or their son's experience of being dyslexic. These are all things that can kind of send positive signals to that employee who's possibly had negative experiences of disclosure in the past. As an employer, you might set up or encourage employee working groups. So these might be groups of employees who identify as being neurodiverse, and they possibly meet once a month in an informal context to support each other and share ideas. And lastly, encouraging diversity training. And we'll look a little bit about that in a minute when we talk about access to work, what that looks like. So when we're going through this kind of process, the next thing I would suggest on the sort of, if you like, ladder of disability support is really making sure that any adjustments are grounded in a workplace needs assessment. Now, whether the assessment comes from the Access to Work scheme, which is in the UK is a government funded scheme that funds some workplace adjustments, they also fund a needs assessment. So whether you go down the Access to Work scheme or you do it in-house, so you might have an in-house disability support team, or you contract out to a private company. Essentially, they're all going to do a very similar function, obviously in slightly different ways, but they'll all conduct a workplace needs assessment, which is really looking at the individual, what that individual does for their job. So what are the tasks that make up their job? And also, crucially, what are the barriers or challenges that they're experiencing in their workplace as a result of their dyslexia or autism or whatever it is that we're looking at in this circumstance. So that assessment is about looking at the whole person, not just the individual. And often that person will have co-concurring challenges. So it won't necessarily just be dyslexia, but they might, for example, have arthritis or whatever it is. So it's a very much a holistic picture of that individual. And they will look at what recommendations they would make to support that individual. And they would create a report which would go to you, the employer, with barriers. So it would outline, these are the barriers that the individual in the workplace, and these are the recommendations. So once that's done, I'm kind of going to give you, if you like, an overview of these recommendations. So I would suggest that there's kind of two forms of recommendations. One is what I'm going to call micro adjustments. So these are the kind of on the ground adjustments that line managers can make kind of there and then on a day-to-day basis. They don't necessarily require anyone else to come in and support you. They're relatively cost effective. Versus recommendations or adjustments that require either a piece of equipment or a specific piece of training or coaching. So if we look to the right of my slide, the micro adjustments, I'll just give you very briefly some examples. So for example, someone with dyslexia might, and I say might because obviously everyone with dyslexia is different, but they might have very specific needs in terms of how information is being relayed to them. So whether they prefer instructions to be relayed in written form or in verbal form. So what is going to help them to anchor that information into their memory? If they prefer written instructions, then it's thinking about, as the line manager, am I using bullet points in my emails? Am I using small paragraphs? So I'm not sending massive chunks of text and expecting them to just kind of absorb it and decode it in a short time. Providing opportunities for a flexible working pattern, access to a private workspace. This is particularly relevant with open space offices where you've got a lot of people working in a room. So you're having an individual who potentially has a short-term memory issue being kind of bombarded by a lot of sensory information, and that would affect their ability to process and remember information that they're dealing with in the moment. So working with your employee to create templates for reports and emails. So it's very much about streamlining the process so that the individual isn't always having to start from scratch with writing. Providing adequate notice for meetings and deadlines so that you're really kind of reducing that potential stress response that someone with dyslexia may have because you're not giving them adequate notice. So you're potentially kind of basically putting them under stress unnecessarily, and that is going to affect their working memory and their processing. Providing visual aids. So for example, when you're conducting a meeting, or whether it's informal, one-on-one, or in a group, looking at how you're communicating. Is it just verbal? Is it just written? Can you supplement those with visual aids, so it's not just the kind of written or spoken word that you're using to communicate with this individual. So the other types of adjustments would be along the lines of equipment and software. So I'm going to give you some examples of what this might mean. So an assessor might recommend some noise cancelling headphones for someone with dyslexia or even ADHD who is experiencing what we might call sensory overload. So they work in an open plan office and they find it very difficult to concentrate and focus on their work. And this means that they are perhaps misreading a lot of text because they can't focus enough to read it. The sensory overload might also cause things like headaches, for example. So an assessor might recommend some noise cancelling headphones. Something else that is can be recommended is literacy, sort of all-in-one literacy support solution, such as Claro or Text Help. So these have sort of many functions. One function is a text-to-speech software, so it will read out text to you. So this can be very helpful, particularly if you need some support with proofreading. It can be difficult to proofread your own work, just either reading it quietly in your own head. So it's actually about being able to hear out loud someone else read the text to you, and you're more likely to pick up any errors in that way. It can also identify any spelling issues. It has things like reading rulers, which will reduce the kind of glare, if you like, or the visibility of the screen to help you to focus on what you're reading at any one time. And it will also have features such as a screen tint. So if you have something called visual stress, which some people have, that sometimes they're dyslexic as well. Sometimes you can have visual stress on your own, which is kind of a visual sensitivity to light. You can get headaches from the screen, and that's why coloured paper or a screen tint can really help to reduce that overload. Another piece of software, mind mapping, is really, really good if you've got an employee that has to kind of take lots of different information. Perhaps it's a research role from lots of different websites and articles, and they need to kind of pull all that together and formulate an argument or an essay or a blog or whatever it is. So it's a very much a visual form of processing that information, and also being able to then turn it into a kind of linear blog or essay. And then one other thing I just want to feature briefly is a speech to text software. So this might be something like Dragon, where you can literally talk to the computer and it will type out what you need. You can also use it to sort of control certain elements of the computer as well. So the idea is that you're not having to rely solely all the time on typing. So that's just a kind of general overview of the kinds of equipment you might be recommended if you have something like dyslexia. Now, alongside the equipment, what you will always be recommended is some assistive technology training. So there's no point, obviously, having all this great technology and all these kind of whizzy tools on your screen if you have no idea how to use it. So you'll be recommended some assistive technology training with a certified trainer who will support you to kind of go from that process of not knowing what to do with it, or how even to open it, to assimilating that knowledge and being able to apply it to your work. So for example, how can you use the mind mapping strategy to achieve a certain task, like writing the blog, or how can you use the literacy support to improve your proofreading? So it will be very much, yes, it's training, but it's very much linked with your job role, using it on the ground. So another thing that might be recommended is strategy coaching. So strategy coaching is a one-to-one service. It can be, depending on the individual, you may have a recommendation of 4 2-hour sessions, or it could be anything sort of up to 6 to 8. And it's very much about helping the individual, so the employee, to create their own strategies and to help them become kind of, I guess, empower them, not usually, sometimes we say to become independent, but I think that sometimes that sounds a bit patronizing, because I'm sure we are all independent, so it's actually about empowering them to understand their learning, how they learn, and to put in place strategies that they can use in the workplace. So for example, with strategy coaching, the coach might come in and look at their organizational skills. What are they doing to improve their concentration? What strategies can we put in place for that? How can we improve the memory? How can we improve their kind of, if you like, performance in meetings in terms of presentation or communication skills, note taking? So there's the variety of ways of things that a strategy coach will work with the individual on, but it's very much dependent on what that individual needs and the context of the business that they're working in. So lastly, one thing that it can be recommended is disability or dyslexia awareness training. So this is not for the individual, for the employee necessarily themselves, but it's for the team. So a team, a line manager may have the best intentions in wanting to support that person, but they don't necessarily know how, and often yes, they'll read the report and you might put in place some of the recommendations, but really in order to kind of really, I guess, see, be able to really kind of grasp what it is you're kind of dealing with, if you like, as a line manager, it's really, really key to have some kind of awareness training. And then I guess lastly, in this kind of end-to-end disability roadmap, we're looking at some kind of technical support on customer care. So when your employee gets that mind mapping software and literacy support, who is installing it, who is getting your license key, who's liaising with the IT department in your company to make sure that all the permissions are granted. So it's all those kind of little fiddly bits that have the potential to kind of throw everyone off center, but are really, really important. And lastly, making sure that within this process there is an account manager, or there is some continuity. So, for example, to monitor the adjustments. So, an individual, your employee might get a new job, in which case you would need to have a new assessment. The employee might have a change of circumstances. They might go on maternity leave. They might reduce their hours, or all of these things can obviously happen and will have an impact on that individual's work. So it's really important that there is sort of continuity amongst all these kind of potentially separate elements of that support. So that's sort of come to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. I'm just going to leave you with some resources that I found really useful. One is from ACAS, the trade union, just titled Reasonable Adjustments, and the other one, Dyslexia in the Workplace, by the Trade Union Council. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Deborah. That was really practical advice for our listeners, particularly what are reasonable workplace adjustments, and the fact that some of those adjustments require no cost at all, and the range of things that are on offer, which I'm sure is improving and expanding all the time. So thank you. Through your work with Dyslexia Box, I guess you're working across various different industries. Could you name or share some of the organisations that are doing good work in terms of encouraging dyslexic employees into the workplace and supporting them while they're there?
So I guess I'd sort of, if you like, signpost anyone that's listening to the Disability Confidence Scheme, and this is a really good scheme run by the government that encourages employers to hire disabled talent and to have inclusive workplaces. So we do work with a lot of employers who are on the road to being disability confident on some degree, and we work with a lot, particularly of local authorities and government departments who, obviously, they have to recognise the importance of their disabled employees, because they are, the local government, the central government, but are, from our experience, are very kind of open and willing to put in place the adjustments, and crucially to, I think, ask for support, because it is quite, I think, as I've kind of highlighted, can be a disjointed service, or a disjointed kind of support model, and so they're very keen to kind of very open to looking for that support.
Well, I guess it's all about, as you said in your talk as well, recognising that many customers may be dyslexic as well, and being aware of their needs and catering for them. And also, it struck me when you were talking about the different assistive technologies, actually how useful they can be for all employees. For example, Dragon, or some of the speech enabled technology. Noise cancelling headphones sound great when you're working in a open plan office, to really help you concentrate. So I guess from employers' point of view, investing in technology can be really useful for not just dyslexic or neurodiverse employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the kind of the idea really is that what is kind of, if you like, dyslexic friendly is actually friendly for all people. So if you're putting in place kind of robust neurodiverse strategies, dyslexia friendly strategies, and actually you're going to capture a lot of other people that have maybe other difficulties because of other reasons, but they're maybe experiencing some of the same kind of behavioral or characteristics or experiences. So what is good for dyslexic people tends to be good for a much more broader section of society as well.
And you said that dyslexia is a hidden disability, and as many as 10% of people do have it. So this is probably one of the most common neurodiverse conditions that an employer is likely to come across. What would your golden rules be for our listeners in terms of helping their colleagues with dyslexia, whether they have disclosed their condition or not?
I think, golden rules, I guess not making assumptions about what dyslexia is. So as much as possible, asking open questions about how their dyslexia impacts them, rather than making an assumption about what it means, kind of thing. So it's very much about making the employee the center of that, that support kind of thing. I think being just open to kind of asking for support outside of that organization, or if you're lucky enough obviously to have specialist disability service, really trying to utilize it. So as the line manager, you're not alone. Often the line manager, you've got a very difficult job. Not only to do your job, you're line managing other people, and then this sort of thing comes in from left field, dyslexia or whatever it is, and you're like, wow, what do I do? And there are special people who we do specialize in that, so please ask for our support. And then I guess in terms of other rules, I think that would maybe not rules but tips would be around what I probably said already, in terms of the types of adjustments you might make that might be relatively quick and obviously cost effective. So it's not necessarily that you have to kind of from the beginning go out and buy lots of fancy equipment. That might come after an assessment, but it might be there are little things that you can do just to make that employee feel more comfortable.
And I guess it's about being prepared as well. As you said, companies have to anticipate a neurodiverse colleague joining the organisation. It's not enough just to react when somebody joins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, the people that are going to be listening to the talk today are those people that are anticipating, because they've joined this event, and they want to learn about how they can better support their employees, and so they're going to be in a much better position to put in place those practices and that kind of strategy, really.
And I guess it's about the workplace culture, isn't it? Encouraging open-ended questions to encourage employees to disclose any conditions they may have, and to make it a welcoming place. And senior leadership team sharing their experience as well. And I guess focusing on what the individual can do, and not what perhaps they are less able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important amongst all of that, there's a lot of stuff to do and think about, is making sure that the employee knows that it's not a bad thing to be dyslexic. So you're not going to get demoted, you're not going to not get that promotion, you're not going to be kind of line managed out the door. If you are, then if that's what you're doing, then that's a different conversation to have with the employer in terms of their legal duties. But just to make sure that they communicate to that individual that it's not something that to be ashamed of, because often when we come to a workplace, we're coming with a lot of baggage from our maybe school days, university days, our previous experiences of disclosure or interactions with other managers, and so it is can be a difficult process. And actually joining an organization where they're saying, no, it's great, it's okay, I mean, you still need support, but it's still okay, and there's you're not going to be penalized.
Well, that's a great note to finish on, Deborah. Thank you very much for your insightful comments. And we really appreciate your time and practical advice, which will be incredibly useful for our listeners to make reasonable workplace adjustments for their colleagues.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth, for having me. Thank you.
Well, don't go away. We'll have another presentation on the hour for Diversity Network's Neurodiversity Digital Focus Day.